Hi there, I'm Andrea Koppel, and it's time for coffee, the podcast where you get to hear firsthand what the jobs and careers that interest you the most are really like. Hey there, Java Junkies. Thanks so much for tuning in today. It is a little dolcezza almond latte day for me. Not sure what you're quaffing as you settle in for another caffeinated career conversation, but hope you've got something warm and maybe a little creamy to boot. My guest on today's episode is Gabriel Sebastian, who is a program manager in Mexico at Population Services International, which is a global health international development organization, also known as a nonprofit. Gabe is also advisor to the board at Maverick Next, also at PSI, which is a philanthropic effort targeting next-gen philanthropists, and we're going to be getting into that with him. Gabe has a super interesting background. He was born in Bolivia, but grew up in Mozambique in a family of social entrepreneurs. In fact, his family founded the largest social enterprise in Bolivia. Gabe, welcome to Time for Coffee. Are you caffeinated and ready to go?
I am drinking green tea. I'm ready to go.
Okay, that's not like high caffeine, the same level that I have from my espresso shots in my latte, but good enough. It's healthier for you, right?
I just like the taste.
Hey, Gabe, where in Mexico are you?
Mexico City.
Fantastic. You could be next door. This is a better connection than what I had with somebody who I was speaking to in Massachusetts yesterday. So I love technology. Gabe, you are a program manager at PSI. Can you get into the primary functions of this job?
Absolutely. As a program manager, I guess there's a little distinction I have to make. We have different levels of management. There's local management. So we do have offices around the world where we run our programs. And then we have HQ. Which is based in DC, but then we have people also kind of around the world working for HQ.
HQ meaning headquarters. Sorry to interrupt, but just want to make sure they know that.
Yeah, at headquarters. So I'm a program manager at the headquarters level. So my job, my day-to-day, so to speak, involves making sure that the local offices are meeting their programmatic and financial objectives to our donors. This involves everything from working with the team on designing the interventions. What are we going to do? What activities are we going to run? We're definitely a lot of developing of work plans. A work plan and a budget is sort of like our bread and butter. We see these things every single day. We track these documents. So we're looking at the work plan and seeing what activities are moving forward. What are the bottlenecks? If there's bottlenecks, how can we help the teams find solutions for them? We're tracking the budget, making sure that our budget execution is on par to what is expected from us. In this industry, we're measured a lot by what's called indicators. There's anything from process indicators to global health indicators to impact indicators. And these are sort of like our performance objectives. So the donor is checking our performance based on these indicators. And as a program manager, I'm making sure that the country teams are meeting these indicators as well. So it's really that. I like to say that informally, your job is a lot of sort of like detective work, trying to find out what's not working and then putting out fires. A lot of the times things change. The countries we operate can be quite complex. Beautifully written and beautifully designed plan or activities, the moment you land on them, everything doesn't work. So you have to be able to quickly adapt to that with it, on top of doing it with the country teams. So that's really it. I mean, I spend a lot of time on the phone or on Skype with the country teams, speaking in French or Spanish. So you're very rarely speaking the language you're like your first language. So it's quite interesting. It's never dull. Let me put it that way.
For sure. So, Gabe, could you give us an example of maybe one of the programs that you're managing right now, and like maybe take us into, doesn't have to be a problem, but maybe a little snag that was hit and how you help to navigate, help the country team navigate their way around that snag?
Absolutely. So one of the countries I'm supervising, so to speak, is Haiti. And in Haiti, we have a very large program that's looking at youth sexual and reproductive health. And it's the concept around that is it's threefold. So we have sort of three pillars, three components, and each one has their own indicators. The first one is to create more knowledge and awareness about the whole suite of reproductive health products and services. Because right now, the only really known ones are the injectable and the pill. Well, there's quite a lot others that we do offer and that are in the long run provide an alternative to women. And the second sort of component is how do we make these products and services sustainable? So it's how do we make sure that it's not just freely given and the moment the project ends, these all disappear, but how do we get the Haitian market to really take ownership of these products so that once this project ends, these products and services are still available to people? And one of the challenges we had is that while we did a lot of work and we did get the distributor and the market to adopt them, we're having a hard time finding the best way for young women to really take interest in these products. We tried everything from traditional marketing, the big billboard, the big ads, the radio, the sort of like the old school way of doing it. And I guess one of the examples of putting out fires or finding solutions to bottlenecks is that we sat with the team. I flew to Haiti, sat with the team, and we just really started going through a brainstorm session about, clearly the traditional is not really working. We need to start thinking non-traditional. And we landed on, we studied these young people's behaviors. What exactly are they doing? Which involved getting out of the office and interacting with youth. And just like any youth around the world, it's the same behavior. They're on their mobile phones. These are youth that have means to pay to buy these products. They're on their mobile phones. They're chatting. They're on Messenger. They're on WhatsApp. They're on Instagram. And one thing we noticed is that our presence in these platforms were not as strong as our presence in like traditional media. So we just took a leap of faith. We're like, okay, why don't we just divert the funds from traditional media to social media or these new platforms and see how that works out? And it did. It's starting to pick up. We have a lot more engagement. We're able to get direct feedback from people, which in a radio spot, unless you ask them to call in, it's very hard to get that. And it started turning the tides around. So that would be an example of something that's, as a program manager, you involved in. You're part of a team to find a solution. It's my personal favorite example because I like this sort of innovative approach. Social media might not be innovative in the real world, but definitely is innovative in this industry. So that would be an example I can give of how do we tackle hiccups from a different perspective. And as a program manager, you're also responsible for that. Even though the team executing are responsible for doing the activities, you're also responsible for meeting the objectives. So you better have some creative ideas as well.
Yeah, you actually took the words out of my mouth. I was just thinking about what you were saying in the Time for Coffee espresso shots, which I recommend that Java Junkies who are interested in international development listen to, because Gabe gets into more specifics regarding the kinds of opportunities that would be available to you. But when you said one of the things that you really enjoyed about this line of work is the opportunity to be creative and to problem solve, and how you're never bored, right? You're always like being pushed. Just when you think you may have whatever it is mastered, you're challenged again. And you have to constantly be trying to think outside the box to figure out the way forward. Gabe, take us into a typical day. And I know there's probably no such thing in your line of work, but if we were a fly on the wall, kind of watching you, what would the day be like?
So it starts off with you waking up, you're preparing your cup of coffee, for me, tea. And the first thing you do is you actually check your phone to see all the emails that landed while you were sleeping. Because since we work globally, you're working across many different time zones. So while you're sleeping, you might be getting emails from people from Burundi, for example, that need your assistance. So you do that. And while you're having breakfast, what I like to do, and most program managers would do, is you would rank these emails in order of priority. And how you do that is actually quite simple. You just ask yourself sort of a question. I guess it's a rhetorical question. You would say, of all these things that are happening, and often it can be from 50 to 100 emails in a day. It depends on the time of the year when it's reporting season, when the donors want the reports. You have to ask yourself which ones can increase the most value today or which ones can cause most harm today. So you do this sort of ranking. And by the time you're done with breakfast, you head out to the office, or in my case, my office, and in Mexico, and then you just start working. First thing you do is you get on a call with the country teams, barring any time differences. But for me, I only have 2 or 3 hour time differences, so it's not that big of a deal. And you start digging deeper, like what exactly is the problem, or what exactly are you trying to achieve to add more value to this program. You sit with them, you hear them out, you strategize a few things, and the best ideas or solutions, you start putting them down on paper. And by paper, I mean an Excel spreadsheet, and we call it a work plan. We start writing reports and narratives. You write a lot. So I would say writing skills are actually pretty important as well. I mentioned languages in the first set of questions, but I would like to add writing is also very important. And then last thing you do is, once you have all your ideas in paper, you start translating them into budgets. What does this mean in terms of money and execution? Do we have the budget for this? And if we don't, what can we do? How do we use the term realign the budget? Do we need to take some money out from one activity to put it into this, etc.? So that you do that almost every day. And then once those are done, the team takes it over, and then you set up some sort of calendar of how often you'll be checking in on them to make sure, are the activities happening? Is there anything that we need to change? And how are we doing with the budget execution? So your month is almost already planned before it starts. So you have these key sort of calls already planned, or meetings, and then day to day you get random calls, or people say, hey, we figure out that there's something that's not working, we really need to fix it today, and they'll call you up. So you have this sort of template of a month, of all the months of the year. Some of these days are blocked off, and you know these in advance. And then your day to day, you wake up and there's hundreds of emails and hundreds of calls, and you have to prioritize them. So that's I would say that's the most sort of common day you can have. And throughout this entire day, you might be speaking 2 or 3 languages in the span of 9 hours. So it's or in writing in these languages as well. So it's quite interesting and sometimes quite taxing.
I bet you're tired at the end of the day.
Yeah, you find a rhythm eventually, but definitely when I first started, it was long days. It was hard for me to try and find this rhythm, and it had to do a lot with my mind just couldn't grasp switching from English to Spanish to French and back and forth, etc.
Gabe, during the introduction to you, I mentioned that you're an advisor to the board at Maverick Next. Could you explain to our Java Junkie community what Maverick Next is and what you do as an advisor to the board?
Absolutely. So Maverick Next, PSI a few years ago started Maverick Collective. It was an innovative idea of a philanthropic fund that would be managed by PSI and with the assistance of Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And the concept of that fund was, how do we get high net worth women to invest in women issues around the world? So anything from menstrual hygiene to sexual and reproductive health, etc. And that fund was very interesting for both people, because from the global aid or global health perspective, now you're dealing with more structured philanthropic efforts. You're dealing with different people. The reporting was different. So it was a huge learning experience. And for the philanthropists, they quite enjoyed the idea of being involved in these projects, so they themselves can have a bit more of a say than just writing a check to someone and sort of forgetting about it. So the next evolution of that is at PSI, we started conceiving these things like, what does this look like in 5-10 years down the line? Is it still going to be the same philanthropist, or what we're seeing now is this hyper acceleration of wealth, where we have very young people that are extremely rich, and maybe some of them, hopefully the vast majority of them, would like to do something sort of like a giving it forward. So we decided to create Maverick Next as a platform for next generation philanthropists. So these are young, high net worth individuals who would like to have their hand held through a philanthropic program. It differs a bit from Maverick Collective in that it's not just a philanthropic programming, it's also coaching these next generation philanthropists on what it means to be a philanthropist. Anything from how do you start advocating for your programs or your health areas that you want to focus on? How do you start speaking in public in high net worth events like Clinton Global Initiative or SOCAP in San Francisco? So we coach them through because they're quite young, and these are the things that they want. So it's half almost like a curriculum for them to become model philanthropists as they grow older. And the other half is philanthropic investment that's targeted to youth programming. So it's youth, like high net worth youth, helping youth around the world. So that was the idea. And as a board member, advisor to the board, I'm part of we have external board members and we have internal ones. I'm part of the internal ones. And it's everything from, since it's a brand new fund, working with Rena, which you met, which is sort of the director of Maverick Next, to understand, like, how should we structure the fund? What is the operating mechanism? What type of engagement should we have with the board members of the fund and also the philanthropists that are coming into the fund? And also, how can we involve the broader PSI? Because we have a lot of young PSIers in the office, not just at the headquarters level, but around the world. And is there a way we can get them more involved in this fund? Because in Maverick Collective, they didn't really get much involvement unless you were part of the specific team that's working on that project. So it has to do, my role is mostly around, I guess you could say, a bit of a design of the fund and its operating model. I'm not leading that part, but I definitely help on designing it to make sure that it's the best experience for the philanthropists, the best experience possible for the board members, and the best experience possible for PSI as a whole.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, it's super interesting. It's my first board position, and it's really interesting to be part of it. And it's such a, for me personally, it's such a crazy good idea having this. I'm thinking things like, Kylie Jenner becoming a billionaire soon, with the youngest female billionaire, instead of maybe using her platform to sell more things that are questionable sometimes, like really skimpy fashion for tweens and all that stuff. She could use her platform to help hundreds, if not thousands, or even millions of people around the world, youth like her, that have not been as privileged. So that concept to me was fantastic, and I'm really excited to be part of it.
Well, if any of our Java junkies follow Kylie, then maybe they could tweet at her.
Yeah.
So, as you were talking, Gabe, I couldn't help but think the fact that you studied international business with a specialty in marketing at Maastricht University in the Netherlands probably comes in handy.
I would definitely say so. It's interesting because you asked me about what majors are important. It's very interesting to see the evolution. All of a sudden, business majors are really highly sought after in this industry. But, the typical ones, the health, public health, or international policy, all of those still apply. But business I'm starting to see that it really comes in handy, especially when you're dealing with a fund and philanthropists. It's as much pitching a business as it is as much pitching a philanthropic endeavor. It's kind of the same skill set. The only difference is the business model, I would say.
So when you were in college, did you know what you were going to do when you graduated? Did you know how you were going to use the major and the focus that you had?
Yes and no. I always knew that whatever I decided I picked as a career, I always wanted to give back to people. Since my family grew up, being socially conscious, they were social entrepreneurs. They were also working in global development. It just sort of ran in the family. I wanted to give back in whatever way, shape, or form possible. But when I was in college, I got wind of the term social entrepreneurship, and that's what I decided I wanted to do. I wasn't sure what, but I wanted to be able to operate in a more sort of independent model, as not necessarily relying on external philanthropists or donors, just sort of like internal business model that can generate my own means of sustainability, but also give back to people. So I think that's why I chose business. I figured, well, I might as well understand how to make a business model and see how it goes.
What is a social enterprise, and what was your first job out of school, and how did you get it?
Well, a social enterprise, it's like a nonprofit, with the exception is that their operating model and by extension their business model is completely different. So the business model is more akin to what you would find in a traditional business or a corporation. So you sell something, you have some sort of revenue stream that is consistent. So it's not dependent on donors or philanthropists, and that you generate your own revenue, which creates a surplus. And this surplus is what you use to keep the doors open. So it operates just like a business. I sell something to you, I make a profit, I keep that profit, and I decide what to do with that profit. The difference with a corporation is that what I decide to do with my excess profit is entirely driven by social goals as opposed to financial goals. So my stakeholders are no longer just my shareholders, if you have any, or my customers. It's more like the general well-being of the people, either the community I serve or the country I serve, etc. So I would say that's the best way to describe a social enterprise. And my first job out of school was actually in a tech social enterprise. It was a startup, so they just had the idea back then, and I got it because I started in my last year in my bachelor's. I started getting really into case competitions at school, which, by the way, I think is the best thing anyone can do at any university, no matter what major they're taking. Just do a lot of case competitions, get your name out there, get the experience. And through that case competition, it was about making eco-friendly detergents. It was sponsored by one of this big consumer goods company, Henkel. And through that one, someone in the competition, because we were trying to apply this really crazy idea of using nanobots to make a sort of like smart detergents, don't require anything. And my idea was like, it would be cool if they were like tiny microscopic mechanical spiders that just eat away the dirt. So you're always clean. And because it was like eco-friendly, I told my idea to one of the coaches from the competition, and he had heard of a tech startup that's trying to do something similar with fair and ecological technology, and he just gave me a name, and I followed up with them. The name was Fairphone, and their mission was to make fair trade smartphones, which I thought was a crazy idea, but also a really cool one. And I noticed that they had a intern position for like a community manager for their social media page, because back then it was just really grim. They were not like, their first language was Dutch, so their English was really poor and they needed some help. So I decided to apply, just see what happens. And when I got the gig, I showed up at the office. The first thing they do is introduce me to the social media coordinator, because they already hired someone else. and they just asked me, so what else can you do? And I told them, well, my major is marketing. So okay, you can be the marketing guy. And that's how I got that internship position. Then I stayed with them, and I guess I got promoted to a paid position, and I stayed with them for almost a year. And I love the startup scene. I think that you asked me how I decided to do what I do. I never knew I was going to join a startup. It never occurred to me in my life to join one, maybe make one, but never join one. And that changed my perspective. I think, especially brand new startups, you just do all possible jobs. Like, you might get a title, but it doesn't mean anything. I've done everything from, marketing analysis to customer service. I remember having to hopping on a 2-hour phone call from a 90-year-old German woman who bought one of her phones and didn't know how to turn it on. So I had to walk her through that process. Done the PR part because I like public speaking. So I've done everything from supply chain management. I didn't know anything about supply chain, but I just learned from the job. You do everything in the startup scene. And I think that's a very valuable asset. So if any of the people here listening, if you're thinking of what should my first gig or internship or anything be, I would strongly suggest pick a startup, because you're going to learn a lot of skills that are really valuable, but you might not be learning them at school.
Now, that's a great, great suggestion. And Gabe, I know, and I would love you to share with our Java Junkies how you started your own social enterprise, HRMB, and I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this correctly, Harambee?
Yes.
Which means let's pull together in Swahili. Why don't you tell us what it is and what happened to it?
Absolutely. First, a notice. I know Harambee became a meme after we started the company. It was the gorilla who people thought was going to attack the baby that fell into its cage, but it was protecting it. So we didn't name it after that, just as a side note. We named it before all of that happened. But Harambee started when I decided after my stint in the startup, I decided I wanted to change my major. I thought I was going to do a graduate degree on marketing, just sort of keep going. But I said, screw that. I really want to learn more about how startups work, how to start one, and innovation in general, etc. So I just picked, I found a graduate program exclusively on that. And I applied and I got it. And once I was there, because of the nature of the program, it means entrepreneurship and innovation studies, they encourage you to start something while you're at school. And so instead of a final exam to pass or a final project, the way they assess you is like, is your business sound enough? So you have to start something, You have to have a business plan and show some semblance of success. And that's how they would determine if you graduate or not, which I thought was really cool. So I joined them. And while I was thinking, okay, what should I start with my peers, make a little team, or I guess my co-founders, I should call them. One of the campus, I forget what his title was, but there was a person in charge of trying to get students to be more socially conscious. That's why I picked that school, ESADE Business School. They do have a high investment in social good. And he name dropped this global competition called Hold Prize, that the whole point is to make entrepreneurship for good. So we're like, okay, let's apply for that. What's the challenge? We read the case, decided to come up with a solution, and we built a company around it. And the challenge was how to improve the health of 10 million people by 2020, I think it was the goal. So we went through a lot of different iterations as startup Django for changes. They don't like to say we didn't like the idea or it didn't work. They say, oh, we iterated. So
Sounds fancier.
Yeah, that's San Francisco talk. If you go into any cafe in San Francisco and everyone's iterating. So we went through a lot of them. And then ultimately we decided we got financed to go to Kenya because we decided we're going to help slum dwellers in Kenya because they have one of the biggest slum communities in Africa. And we went there and we just decided, okay, instead of us trying to figure out what they need from Barcelona, where I was studying, let's go there and ask them, and try and figure out what they need from their community. And we found that there's a lot of problems with myopia. So there's a lot of eye conditions. And since their biggest health problem is poverty, I like to say that the biggest health problem in the world for poor people is poverty, because that causes all sorts of other health problems. We looked at, okay, how do you generate income? And these are informal communities. These are straight in the slum. And we noticed that especially the older women relied on making bracelets and necklaces with beads, and they were threading fishing wire through them. And if you have any eye problems, that task becomes daunting, and it's a very slow process. And we sort of picked up on it, like, how long we timed, like on the side, we started timing people. It's like, okay, how long does it actually take them to make those things? And then we took one of the ladies we asked her if she would like us to assess her eye conditions and maybe give her some glasses. And we gave her a pair of glasses to her that fit her measure, and the timing improved. It doubled her productivity. So that's sort of like our pitch, like, healthcare, because they don't care about health. You tell them about health, and they're like, yeah, that doesn't matter. My biggest problem is making money. So instead of trying to sell them glasses for a health side, we told them, we're selling you glasses from a productivity side, and it worked. And then we went with that for the competition, and we were one of the. We went all the way through to the global finals. So I think it was like 10,000 teams around the world competed. Then there's 6 regional. Of those 10,000, 300 are selected. Those go to 6 different regions, so 50 in each region. We competed in Dubai, and they fly around for all of this. And then we won in Dubai, and then 6 regional finalists compete at the global final in the Clinton Global Initiative in New York. And we were there, we pitched. Unfortunately, we didn't win, but then we tried to find our own seed capital. We got a little bit, but the sort of the entrepreneurship scene, especially social entrepreneurship scene in Europe, is not quite as developed, like I would say in the United States. So the amount of money we got was nowhere near what is common for seed rounds in the US. But it kept our doors open for maybe another 8 months. And unfortunately, we never had enough money to scale it up. So we shut it down. Oh. But that was a great experience. I don't really regret it. I learned a lot of what I could have done better. Definitely, I would say choosing the right co-founders is very important. I had some excellent co-founders. I had some that were a little questionable, but it was a great experience. And I get to use a lot of that experience, that entrepreneurship endeavor here, because I got so used to chaos, like nothing really being structured, and then trying to find opportunities in all of those scales to move forward on a day-to-day basis, and not on a monthly or yearly basis. It was just day-to-day. And I think I get to use that experience in my day-to-day job here.
It's amazing, Gabe. It really is. I think it's a shame that Harambee wasn't able to keep going, but maybe at some point you can restart it, because it sounds like your mission was fantastic, just fantastic. By the way, you mentioned the business school. I think you did, ESADE. Am I pronouncing it correctly, in Barcelona?
ESADE, ESADE.
Yes. And this is the school that's focused exclusively on entrepreneurship?
No, it's a business and law school. However, they do have an entrepreneurship program. I think it was one of the first at the graduate level in Spain to do it. And the reason I chose that one over any other school anywhere is because they do have a high commitment to social goals. So it was like a perfect match for what I wanted to do.
Fantastic. Gabe, just very quickly here, and it feels like maybe you've already touched on it with Harambe, but if you could share a story with our listeners about a low time for you in your profession at any point when you really felt like, whether it was that you had a challenging boss or you were in over your head or you screwed up in some way and just had to dig deep to move forward, and how you did it.
Well, the first one was definitely Harambe. I felt like I was on top of the world. Being a global finalist, they treat you, it's kind of like the hype Silicon Valley gives to potential startups that crash and burn like a few months later. So once we got to the global finals, we were surrounded by people who were just flying us all over the place. We were doing interviews. Our pictures were everywhere. I think my picture's still in the ESADE website. I felt like I was on top of the world. And when that collapsed, I was 24. I wasn't really prepared. I guess mentally I wasn't prepared to fail because I felt like I kept winning in life until that point. And that to me was a huge wake up call because when that collapsed, I was having a hard time trying to think like, how do I even look for jobs? Because I went straight from school to my own thing and I sort of got used to being my own boss. And I didn't like the idea of losing. And I think that what I did is after a few months of being just almost depressed about the situation, I noticed that the reason I wasn't finding anything is because, I wasn't looking at my self-worth was down the drain. So I stopped doing everything that I was doing and I started focusing on, I guess it sounds a little corny, but loving myself again. Realizing, I am worth it. I'm a smart kid. I've achieved a lot of things. And I try to change the narrative that instead of, I totally failed, started changing the narrative. Like, actually, what have I learned from this? And the moment I started doing that, I started changing my applications based on that. So my cover letters were all like, this is what I've learned from my failed startup experience. And I started getting a bit more positive responses. So that period of time has probably been my lowest professional so far, my lowest, hopefully the only one in my professional career. My self-worth was down the drain. I had no idea how to apply for jobs. I had no idea what it was like to work for a boss. Because even when I was working for a startup, we had a CEO, but everyone was sort of always autonomous. So it was really different. And it just took a lot of sort of pausing, reflecting, and realizing that I wasn't going to get anything until I started believing in myself that I could. And I think that's important to know, especially now when it's so difficult to get jobs. You might send 200 applications, you might hear from 2 or 3. Just never let that sort of performance, I would say, like a ratio of 2 out of 200 is kind of weak. Don't let that affect your own self-worth. It affected me. It was really crappy. At one point, I had no money because I wasn't working at the time. And I was living off lentils and onions for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Never again will I do that. So, everything changed when I started seeing my own self-worth again.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that, Gabe. I can say listening to you, and I'm 54 years old, and thinking, oh my God, this amazing guy who was in his 20s, who's not thinking that he's this fantastic person because he didn't win this incredibly competitive competition. I'm so glad that you found how to love yourself again and value yourself, because it took such courage for you to go and do that in the first place.
Well, thank you. I mean, in hindsight, I never saw it that way. But I guess I was riding this ego wave, where you just keep winning. And it's really easy for that to get to your head. But when that crashed, your ego crashes too. And it was tough. So I've definitely learned from that. And I'm happy. Now looking back, I'm happy I went through that at that age because it gives me enough time to bounce back. I keep thinking, wow, what if I crashed like that in my like my mid 40s or 50s or 60s, like when I have more responsibilities, I have a family, etc. I'm just happy I learned that really early in my life.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. Final time for coffee question here. If you could go back and do college all over again, based on the wisdom that you have now, what advice would you give yourself?
The main advice I would give myself is take language courses seriously. I sort of never paid much attention to them. I took French because I sort of wanted something, but I never gave it much thought. Now I realize languages are probably the most valuable asset you can have in this industry, and maybe others as well. Because a lot of the job you learn on the job, what you learn in academia is very academic versus the real world is completely different. But languages is different. That would be the first one. Take languages or language courses seriously. And the second one would be I only started getting involved in sort of these case competitions towards the end of my academic career, I would say. So I did it in my senior year of my bachelor's and then at the graduate level. But these competitions are available from the start. And knowing what I do know now and all the experiences and the opportunities that these case competitions gave me, if I could go back, the moment I step into that like first class in my first year, I would start looking for what can I do now? What can I do now? What can I do next year? What can I do the year after, etc. That would be what I would do differently.
Gabriel, Sebastian, thank you so much for making time for coffee, time for green tea with me and the Java Junkie community today. Your honesty, your self-awareness, and your knowledge is just fantastic. And I greatly appreciate you making the time for us.
No, thank you for inviting me. This is fantastic. I love the idea of sharing wisdom with the next generation of professionals, especially if they want to get into these fields where they want to do good for others. I'm totally down for that.
Thanks so much for listening to Time for Coffee, where the professionals in the jobs that most interest you always have time to grab coffee 24/7, no matter where you live. I have one quick favor to ask you. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe to Time for Coffee. Thanks so much.